And that's pretty much thanks to our good pals at Google and other big platforms who massively monopolize the advertising market and make that difficult. But the other side of the problem is that it's never been easy to generate our other source of revenue, which is revenue from our readers and our users, which we used to be able to do quite effectively because we would sell people newspapers in shops. Not everybody sold their newspapers, but there was physical distribution of newspapers. And when somebody bought one or picked one up, there was a direct translation into revenue. And that's my diagnosis of why things have become so difficult. Um, and obviously, everyone wants to talk about it at the moment, but the advent of AI is just making it much worse because there's two things that AI is doing. The first one is taking our content and using it to create competing services. When somebody poses a question to an AI, what the AI doesn't want to do is send them anywhere else. What it wants to do is tell them the answer right there. Um, so that's obviously massively problematic, and it has an impact on both our ability to be discovered and our ability to convert our attention into money. So it's really accelerated. And as I said, all publishers have become dependent on these tech platforms, but they're being suffocated by them. The tech platforms are getting richer, publishers are getting poorer, but it's really hard to break that cycle. Um, so I hope that's a sort of familiar, if slightly depressing story. But the reason I put it that way is because the problem is also the solution. If we can find a way to command more engagement than we've been able to do so far, and we can find more reliable ways of turning engagement into revenue, then perhaps we can start to forge a different path forward. Um, and that's the thing I've been working on. That's the solution I've been trying to build. But fundamental to that isn't, it's no good if every publisher is separately trying to do the same thing, but in an isolated way. And that's been another problem on the internet. It's been very difficult for publishers to collaborate because they're competing for the same very limited pool of money. So it means that even the most successful publishers have created their own sort of little isolated pockets of success, but it's been very hard to join that up. That's frustrating for publishers because uh, it, they have to go through all the work of acquiring customers and retaining customers, all of which come with high price tags, especially if you're trying to do subscription. Also, really frustrating for users because they can't necessarily get everything they want, and they're always sitting with these big platforms in between them and the content they want. So the conversation that Kate and I have been having for a while, and that I've been having in other countries, is that we shouldn't try to solve this problem as a series of isolated solutions, even if they're built on the same platform. We will have much more success and it'll be much easier if we think of this as a network opportunity. And talking to all of you, one thing I immediately see is a network. You're already a network, you're talking together, you're collaborating together, you're sharing knowledge and information, and you're all facing broadly similar problems and looking collectively at how to solve them. If we can create a network of titles and newsrooms, and if we can bring all the publishers together, including the ones not in this group and the larger ones who have access to bigger and broader audiences, then we can start to build something that is capable of scaling to the size that the big platforms have. No one publisher will ever do that. Publishers together can, because publishers together are capable of addressing whole populations. How do we do it? Well, we can get on to what Axate does, and I'll show you how Axate works. But Axate fundamentally is two things. One is a shared sort of single sign-on platform, so people do not need to separately create accounts for every publication that's part of the network. They only need to do it once. And it's also a shared payment platform, which does not require subscription. In other words, it does not require a commitment to recurring monthly payments. It is possible to buy things one off, either an issue, if you like, a day's access, or individual articles. And there's no lower limit to what you charge, which might sound weird because you know, the smallness of the charge isn't necessarily the first thing people think of when they're trying to sell something, but that is how newspapers work. Newspapers have always been cheap and high volume and capable of spontaneous transaction. You pick one up, you hand over a small amount of money. You don't have to do the same thing tomorrow. Can if you like. Can buy a different newspaper tomorrow if that's what you want to do. If you want to sell something like a newspaper, you have to be able to charge a realistic amount of money. And typically, uh, payment systems overwhelm that because their charge per transaction is quite high. So, can we invite every South African to join? If we've got a big enough network of publishers, yes, we can. What do we ask them to do? We say sign up to get your login, and your login will log you into all of these publications, not just one of them. And if a publication is trying to charge, is asking people to pay, you can pay using the same payment technique on all of them and without having to promise to be a subscriber. You can just try stuff, you can do it once, you can do it more often, but you don't have to commit to monthly payments. Really important. In every society that I've come across, a big part of the resistance to subscription is psychological. It's the idea of paying for something all the time, which you're not necessarily using all the time. It's not just to do with financial circumstances, affluence. Those are factors in how much people will pay. But actually, the psychology of paying for things that you're not constantly using is one of the most off-putting things about subscription. So we definitely need a new model. And subscription for news only ever in most countries, most of them do not get above 10% in aggregate, 10% of the population paying for news. So 90% or more of every market is still available. Obviously, the thinking behind this is that users are becoming customers. We're all collectively working together to sign people up so that they can get access to this network. And then we're working individually and together to give them a product they want to pay for and turn them into someone who's capable of paying and then is paying, and that people can engage across the entirety of that network, and we can build true network effects. What I mean by that is, as more customers become active, there's more opportunities, obviously, for publishers to sell. As more publishers join the network, there's more things for customers to buy, and everybody can compete to have the most popular product and the one that people choose to visit and pay for the most and the most often. I'm going to very quickly show you how Axate works because it's all a bit abstract otherwise, and then I'm going to shut up and let's turn this into a conversation. There's more I can say, but I'm monologuing away in the
Dominic, we can't see your slides. Did you decide not to? I mean, your slides have disappeared. Was that
yeah, that's
your
because I'm
intention? Okay,
switching
perfect.
to
Okay.
show you how Axate works. So
Okay,
here is
perfect.
Axate on the Toronto Star in Canada, where we're also working to build a network of publishers. You can see this little green tab in the corner. That's meant to indicate to a user that this publication is part of the network. It's not really meant to become the focus of their journey. However, you can click on it and you will see a few things. Obviously, I'm a UK user, so I'm seeing my currency in pounds and pence. But what you can see here is that the Toronto Star is charging 25 pence to read a single article. And if you read two in a day, they don't charge you for the rest of the day. You have unlimited access for the rest of the day. So it's a bit like a cover price. And what it's meant to do is to encourage readers to read as much as possible and get the best value for money. Because what we want readers to do is develop a habit and want to come back tomorrow. And it's really hard for readers to do that if you're constantly pushing them away and saying, well, that'll cost extra, or there's some sort of metered type arrangement. And the idea of Axate is that when you do read a paid story, it just takes your money. The first time you read one, it'll say, do you want us to ask every time before you pay? But most people will turn that off because most people know that they're happy to pay 50 pence. They're not really worried about that. And they don't want this thing popping up the whole time, interrupting them. So the idea of this is that the payment part gets out of the way and people stop really noticing it because they're happy with the title and they know that it's worth it. And the only other part of Axate worth showing you is this, which is a completely unrelated British website, nothing to do with Toronto. They have set their pricing at 50 pence for an article or £1 for the day, so they're more expensive. But what you can see is that my login has traveled with me. I've not had to log in again. My money in my wallet has traveled with me, so I prepay a little bit into a wallet and then we deduct from that, and that's how Axate works. That's it really. As far as the customer's concerned, they move around from one site to another and it just works. And obviously, the bigger the network gets, the more useful it becomes, and the more they get used to this way of paying, and the more that becomes part of their standard way of going about things. And that's kind of it when it comes to the product. The whole idea of the product is it's something that you don't really need to think very hard about as a customer. You don't want to have to teach people stuff, and you don't want them to be constantly interrupted with requests to confirm payment. You want them to just go around reading what they like and not being unaware of paying, but being happy to pay these small amounts for things that they like and value. And what we really want. I'll just show you one more slide just to kick off the conversation. So I'm jumping forward slightly, but I think it's kind of relevant to what we might want to talk about next, which is that if we have a shared incentive, in other words, if a customer reading across multiple titles creates more opportunity for all of them, we have ways of offering people journeys, ways of discovering content that aren't necessarily always going via Google or Facebook or whoever. Could we embed? This is a screenshot from a little demo we've done elsewhere. Could we embed links to relevant other stories in all of our stories? And could we invite users to stay within our network? I think this is particularly relevant for local publications, because local publications have an audience that has interests that go beyond the locality, but the individual publication doesn't have coverage that goes beyond the locality because they're local. Can we offer them a journey to other things that they'll be interested in? And can we make that a journey which creates more profit and opportunity for everybody in the network, not just the publisher on the receiving end? That's the way our business model works, and that's the opportunity we get by setting up a network. So I guess to round off my my monologue, what I'm proposing to South African publishers and in other countries is that this is the moment to form a network, to do it confidently together, and to start to mitigate the increasing risks to our business from developments in the tech world, and take advantage of those developments in the tech world. Take advantage of the fact that AI is producing garbage and people's trust in things they discover online is going down, and go with a really confident message to the population, saying, look, firstly, we've got something better for you, product as well as payment method, and secondly, this is it's almost a patriotic thing to do with the large American tech platforms sucking all the value out of our local economy, the American government doing their best to destroy as much as they possibly can everywhere else in the world. Now's the moment to come together as publishers and as a population, and that's why I think the timing of this conversation might be fortuitous. So with that, I will pause and hope that you've got lots of questions, comments, and so on.
Thanks so much. I think that's great. I think that's a super overview. Colleagues, any questions that you have to Dominic? Because one of the things I wanted to say, Dominic, is just the kind of issue around the infrastructure required to kind of set it up and the kind of timelines, because we've discussed this ourselves. I mean, what are your thoughts around the kind of cost that there might be to publishers, to kind of individual publishers, and then also in terms of setting up the kind of network infrastructure? Because I mean, we're always so incredibly cost sensitive. And I mean, it's tricky to give us a sense of it, but yeah, times, costs, some of those practical things about setting up the network and kind of joining the network. It would be good to get your thoughts. Yeah.
Yes, sure. The way the Axate business model works, we don't charge fees. We share revenue. So that means there's no direct cost. You don't have to send money to Axate in order to get started. The cost of getting started is the technical implementation. That obviously varies because not everybody has the same technical infrastructure. However, if you are running your site on a sort of fairly standard WordPress backend, it's normally a trivially simple thing to do. We sometimes do it for our customers. They give us a login to their WordPress and we set it up for them, and it takes about half an hour. So that's not usually much of a barrier to getting started. The other part of it, which I would suggest publishers need to focus on far more, is how do we communicate this to readers, and how do we price it, and what's our comm strategy, and do we offer promotional incentives for people to come on board, all of that sort of thing. But also, much more importantly, how do we make sure that what we're offering them is something better than the same product as yesterday, now with a price sticker on it? And that's a bigger question. Good thing about that question is it's iterative. You start on day one with something, you learn from what's working, and you can, on day two or day 10 or day 100, you can keep improving. You can make your product better and better because it will respond to new incentives. The incentives at the minute are all about maximizing volume, trying to pick up some advertising revenue, not charging people because that's a barrier to those things. When those incentives change, the products will start to change too. And that's another great advantage of being in a network, because everyone can learn from each other. So what we ought to be seeing, if we get this right, is on day one, we've got a bunch of people paying. Probably most of them are supporters as opposed to really customers, because people like and support their local news publications. But over time, as we improve, as we do one-off specials, for example, that you're charging for, even if the rest of your site stays free, we gradually start to turn that into a bit more of a movement towards people paying for a product that's really worth it and that they want and need.
No, great. Okay, colleagues, any questions? Yeah, Valent, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you very much, Dominic. I think on my side, the first question was partly answered in relation to your content management system platforms, because I just wanted to understand, in terms of Axate, the integration between small publishers' existing website and CMS platforms. How will that work? But then I think you partially touched on it. And then the follow-up question on my side is, with the AIP, we represent a whole range of indigenous languages or publications that print in indigenous languages. So I just wanted to get a perspective from you in relation to how effectively will it work when it comes to publication that prints in multiple languages or operate in rural areas, and then especially in indigenous languages. Thanks. I think that's one of the questions. I don't know if I should ask all or we can just engage, but I think that I'll just
So
stop for now.
thanks, V. Yeah, so let's get Dominic to answer that, and then we'll have Juan, and then we can definitely come back to you again.
No problem.
Axate is architected to support multiple languages, so we would need to translate our user interface, but that's fine. I think the thing we would need to work through together is how do we select the correct interface language for a given user, which is much more complex in South Africa than it is in some countries, because there's so many languages, and I'm guessing a lot of people speak more than one. So that's a piece of work we would need to do together as a group.
Yeah, absolutely. Juan?
Morning. I would like to know if the system now supports South African rands, or can it be still using dollars? Can it use other currencies?
It supports any currency, and we localize the currency to the user. So, for example, if a if a British user wanted to come to one of your sites, you could choose to set a price in pounds that is not necessarily just a direct translation of your price in rand, which would normally come out to a tiny number of pounds and would be far too cheap in the terms of the local British expectation of cost. So we would expect you to set a price in pounds that was market relevant to the UK market without the consequence of making your South African price far too expensive. Another piece of work we would need to do to enter the South African market is obviously integrate with local payment providers. At the moment, we do payments through a platform called Braintree, which is part of PayPal and hyper secure and operates in most countries. We've done some due diligence work on this already in terms of the logistics of entering the South African market, but obviously people need to be able to pay with whatever familiar local tool they are using, and they need to pay in a familiar local language currency, which would be rand for sure.
Oh, no problem. Thanks. One last question though is with the setup, do you install a WordPress plugin, or do you insert a code?
We do have a plugin, which we do sometimes use, or sometimes we do it more manually. It's a pretty simple setup. There's really two main parts to the setup. One is adding our JavaScript to your pages so that our little widget appears and works, and making sure that the WordPress ability to show or hide content is enabled and trusts our API. And the second piece, which is a bit more technical, is we need a DNS change, domain name system change, so that we can serve cookies on your site, which is how we recognize users moving from site to site. That's a sort of 2-minute piece of work. You just need to get access to your DNS. And that's it. And, we are also hoping, if we can develop the South African market, to do integrations with groups like News Team so that they just have a built-in module, enable Axate, enter your API key, boom, it works. So as it develops, we expect to make this sort of simpler and simpler.
Thank you so much.
And Juan, I can see Anton's on the call here, and Anton and me and various others have been looking at News Team as the kind of CMS system, and they've done a lot of work with Arena, and in fact with a lot of big media houses, but are now kind of developing their software for smaller publishers. So there's something that so that some of that development work is happening as we speak. I think you had another question, and yeah, please go ahead, colleagues, with questions. But Valent, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Sorry, colleagues, for just taking over. But yes, I think, my follow-up question is about revenue and monetization. So I just wanted to, obviously, it's safe to say that everyone, if they just want to adopt Axate, it's that thing where they're looking in terms of revenue. So the question will be, what are revenue uplifts that have publishers seen after implementing Axate? And then the follow-up to that, it's more or less like a paragraph, but then with different questions. But then that's the first one. And then the second one is, how are micropayment distributors among publishers in the network, especially for small and independent publishers?
Okay, let me take that second one first. The way the Axate business model works is, let's imagine someone spends 100 Rand on access to a title. That might be a bit high, but just for ease of maths. So they spend 100 Rand. 15% of that 100 Rand comes to Axate. That's how we get paid. So that's our only revenue source. So 85% of that goes to the publisher. And that's of whatever price you have set. So it's not that there's a pool of money that we distribute amongst publishers. Publishers set their prices. The more they sell, the more money they make. That's pretty much how it works. If that same user who has signed up on a particular publisher then wants to go and read something on a different publisher, does not have to sign up because they already signed up, then publisher one who signed them up, gets 15% of the money they spend on the other site. So if you can get your user to spend money somewhere else, you make a bit of extra money. And the publisher of the site they've gone to always gets a minimum of 70% of whatever price they've set. So the idea of that is that everyone has an incentive to encourage users to move around the network and spend money in multiple places. So that's how the business model works. So I'll pause there and just ask for any questions, because yeah, just make sure that's
yeah.
all.
Does that make sense, everybody? Yeah. Any further questions on how that works? So, colleagues, I thought there was also some interesting discussions which we were having. I mean, over a long period around, are South Africans, particularly in kind of small towns, rural areas, etc., prepared to pay for news, because a lot of our publications are actually distributed free. And just the sense of, maybe there needing to be some kind of subsidy model. So some kind of money going in, for people to, that maybe the MDDA or government or somebody would have to think about that. So I just wanted to ask the question to everybody online. I mean, what do people think about our audiences paying? Even, because I know there's quite a strong resistance to paying, and in fact, I think a lot of our publications people don't pay, and it's distributed free. I mean, yeah, I don't know what will people think about that, because it is definitely an issue which we need to grapple with in the kind of South African market.
Kate, if I can jump in, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I think just to add on the question as well, that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask Dominic in relation to what suggestion can he provide in terms of educating our publishers, not publishers, but then more or less our readers who are used to free content about paying. Doesn't matter, even small amount. That's the question that I wanted to actually ask him. But yeah, just to add on what you just said.
And then I want to also take Austin before Dominic answers. Austin, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Dominic, for a stunning presentation. I think it's quite innovative and it's different. I'm one of those publishers who are located in a rural town. It's called Emelo in South Africa, in Mpumalanga. I think this model will work, but it will compel us to have different stories on our website from those that we have on the publications. Maybe on the hard copy, we upload the stories, but still there will be other premium content that is only available on the website and not in the free copies that we distribute.
Yeah, interesting. Yes.
I mean, I think all of these three questions, and the one about the sort of uplift that publishers see, are all touching on actually exactly the right question, which is, how can your products respond and evolve so that you can create a greater desire amongst people to pay for them more often? In the end, if you take a free product and put a price sticker on it, that's not particularly appealing to people who are used to getting it for free. It's pretty difficult. And also, if you have a free product, your digital product anyway has very likely been built to maximize traffic and revenue, which means it's not necessarily that appealing to users. You often see, I think that point about the stories that you feature is exactly right. You would choose different stories if you weren't trying to maximize sort of search returns, and you were trying to maximize kind of satisfaction for readers. All of which is to say, there's an evolutionary process that needs to happen here. It can't start unless you have the ability to charge people, but it's not like on day one you can click your fingers and it will suddenly magically produce an avalanche of money. In the end, selling anything to anyone depends on their desire for the thing you're selling exceeding the cost. And obviously, their perception of cost is partly to do with their means. So, if people don't have much money, they'll think of cost, which for me is price plus kind of hassle. They'll think of it differently. And we're at the very bottom end of that. Newspapers always have been. If you're a popular newspaper in any market, you are cheap to buy and you're available to everybody regardless of their economic circumstances. And I think that's the natural place for newspapers. So it leads to a second question, which is, what might I do on day one to offer people something worth buying? And my suggestion would be that there's a whole load of things you can do, and probably if we embark on this process, we'll do workshops and we'll keep doing them, so people can share feedback on what's worked, what sort of uplift it produced, what sort of cost was incurred, how sort of risky it was. But just to give you some ideas, I think one that you just mentioned, which was you concentrate your premium stuff into a premium section or whatever that you clearly know people value highly, and you create an expectation regularly that will cost money, and that's not a huge amount of money, is a good way of starting. Most people do have that content. I don't know what it's like in South Africa, but just to relay an experience from a British local publisher, they did really well by focusing on local government, local crime and courts, and local sport. Those were the things people wanted to pay for, and producing more of that wasn't very expensive. Sending a reporter to a court for a day produced quite a lot of stories, just hanging around in courtrooms and reporting what was going on. And those got a disproportionate response. So I think what we'll find is that we will identify those little sort of areas of opportunity that people can start to experiment with quite easily without having to do a huge product revamp or invest a huge amount of money in the hope that it might work. Can be quite experimental. The other thing that's worked pretty well for some publishers, which I think is also an interesting opportunity, is the idea of kind of one-off or pop-up paid micro products, I suppose you might call them. And it's an important thing to remember that if you're not demanding a monthly subscription, you don't have to have paid content every day. There's no expectation that this is going to be a continuous supply. So, for example, around local sporting events, local cultural events and festivals, school events, sometimes you do a lot of coverage, you put it all into a special section and you say, hey, great. And you literally hand things out to people at the event. So you use this QR code tomorrow morning and see all our coverage, and it will cost you whatever it do, £1 or £2. So you can do experimental kind of pop-up type paid products without having to abandon what you're doing or take big risks with what you're doing. And I think one of the great advantages of working in a network is we can all share that. There's no zero-sum game. So letting someone else learn from what's gone well for you will not cost you anything. It will actually just create more activity in the network and create a wider adoption of it, and everyone will win. Austin.
Fantastic. Austin, please go ahead. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I have a follow-up question. I saw during the presentation, there was something about an emailer, like an email list that they send headlines to.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know what criteria do they use to select which headlines they pick up, or do they pick up across all members, or is it just the select few?
At the moment, that's done quite manually. It's an editorial process, but it is one of the areas where I think we might actually deploy AI to our advantage. If we use an AI model to make recommendations across all of the publications in the network, I think what we might have is an opportunity to do things like create personalized recommendation emails, embed panels under stories saying, if you like this, you might like that. That's the sort of thing AI is really good at. Not use it to summarize the story and take people away from us, but use it to generate sort of onward journeys and ways of promoting and nudging users collectively. What's very important, I think, to me, but also to the whole network, is in the end, it's down to publishers and editors to decide what's appearing on their sites and what they're recommending. But I think making that a purely manual editorial process is quite clumsy. People might be choosy about who they recommend. They might not want to recommend their direct competitor. I would understand that. If they don't, they might want to form their own informal network, for example, of sites that are big on sport, so they can take people from their little bit of sports coverage into something which is much more sport obsessed for those people who like it, collect a little bit of money for their trouble, and have some traffic come back the other way, or about cultural stuff, about food, about whatever the things, the sort of specialist areas. So I think that's where AI offers an opportunity as well as a threat.
Brilliant. So Dominic, just this kind of, I mean, I'd love to get a sense from you in terms of like your, the UK publishers. So most of them, as you said, I mean, they're local publishers and they're concentrating and focusing on their particular town, their particular area. Do you find that people are interested in content from other local areas? I mean, is there an appetite? Because in a way, I mean, local publishers are precisely that. They're about that local area. So so in terms of kind of getting people to then say, hey, look, I'm sitting in Newcastle now, I want to know about what's happening in the Eastern Cape, which is quite far away. Do you find that kind of interest? Because there's something great about a network of local publishers, because I think you're quite right. We're not competing. We're in our area. We're doing our stuff. But does that mean that then there's kind of quite a lot of cross-pollination? I'm playing devil's advocate.
I mean, what we see is that it's a kind of Venn diagram. You see overlapping circles. Some of them are obvious, like the next door local area, which you also spend time in and feels local to you. Some of them are also obvious but aren't geographical. Sport in Britain, it's all about soccer, basically. So if your team is playing a team from another area, suddenly you're interested in that area for that match anyway, because you want to see all the coverage that's taking you in that direction. And identifying where those overlaps exist and offering recommendations to take people on that journey is quite important. Something that I think is underdeveloped and that I think we could really work on in South Africa is stuff that isn't sort of bounded by anything in particular, but cultural stuff, for instance, art stuff. That those sorts of areas that can exist everywhere and everyone has an interest, but it's defined by their personal preferences rather than a sort of geographical grounding. And I think the other thing that is potentially very, very helpful if we get it right is the involvement of wider, national type press, because they overlap with everyone. And they will also have access to a sort of large mass of customers. And if you can embed local headlines, for example, inside the website of one of the big national publishers, which they might like because their customer might go and spend a bit of money with you and they'll make some, then you can start to sort of redefine what the online experience is. And it's less of a siloed single title thing. You have to do the work to find the next thing for yourself. We start to push people on these journeys. But to sum up, there's always some areas where you can identify overlap. And the job of growing this network is to make those overlaps bigger and to take people on longer journeys from one thing to the next thing and beyond. We know the internet's good at that. Social media is brilliant at it. We need to get better at it.
So, and I mean, to be fair, I mean, we do obviously have community of interest publications. And so community of interest would be absolutely, as you're saying, I mean, a religious publication, a publication that, for instance, looks at agriculture. And so, then that particular theme. So I think, I mean, that is, makes a huge amount of sense to have those kinds of publications, part of your network and your local publications. And as you say, your bigger ones. So yeah. Great.
Agriculture is a brilliant example, and we've just been approached in the UK by a group of cycling magazines, which is interesting because they're not all published by the same company. They've got together and said, can we do this together? Because we've got this huge overlap in audience and we're not doing very well with our monetization. So, I mean, those sorts of things.
That's very interesting.
Exactly the right thing.
Fred, please go ahead.
Thanks, Kate. Great talk, Dominic. The various newspapers and media around the world that you find, what do you find is the average price they would charge if you're talking about community media or smaller media? Thanks.
In terms of what they actually charge? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. For the article or for the day, things like that.
With smaller community type publications, the strong evidence so far is that charging for the day works much better because each individual piece of content doesn't really have substantial standalone value. That's different with, big high-end broadsheet newspapers where they might have a huge feature. But really, when you're talking about local publications, it is the collection of content is valuable, and each individual item isn't. So for example, maybe I can show you. If only I could multitask better. There's one I'm thinking of that charges 25 pence for the day. That's it. You get charged the first time you read an article, and then you've got the rest of the day for free. And I think that model works best for community. You can always have an experiment with the pop-up product alongside. Hey, here's an additional thing, costs extra. Might be around for longer, might be a bit more evergreen, and it charges a different price. But that's what we've learned works best, and it needs to be priced at a level which is within the sort of spontaneous, impulsive spending ability of the local demographic. That's a market thing. There's no absolute price that you can say is the right price, except when you consider it in the context of what you know about your audience.
Great. Any further questions, colleagues? Comments as well?
I just have the last two, Kate.
Please go ahead.
Sorry about that. So I think when it
No
comes
problem.
to trust and data privacy, we all know that those are major concerns for everyone and for the readers. So my question is, what are the tools, or what is it that Axate can do for first-time readers in terms of mentioning that their data and everything will be protected? Can the Axate ensure user privacy and then ensure the trust and between the public readers and all of that? What are the things that you can say, and then what is it that you can implement in terms of that aspect?
Well, we operate according to GDPR rules, the European rules on data privacy, which are quite strict. We do share data with publishers where publishers want it and where they have their own protections in place that are sufficient. And obviously, that requires publishers to respect user choice when it comes to things like marketing and so on. But essentially, the way the journey works for users is they need to agree our privacy policy and the publisher's privacy policy, and those privacy policies are expected to be GDPR compliant. We can update that for South Africa. We don't have to operate to one set of rules, but that bar is set quite high already. The other thing worth noting is we don't actually have very much user data. The only personal piece of data we have about users is usually their email address or their mobile phone number. We don't ask them to fill in a big profile of themselves and give us lots more information. And then obviously we know about their activity on the platform. We don't have their payment details. The way the payment platforms work is we have a token for the payment platform, but we never see that user's card details or anything like that. So from that point of view, the Axate platform is pretty secure, and there's not much to discover about a user within our data set anyway. We do encourage publishers to ask users to share data with the publisher, but that needs to be by opted in consent. We don't do it by default.
Okay. I think the last one, this is the last one, I promise.
No
So what
problem.
kind of support or guidance can AIP members expect if they want to try the model?
So say that again.
What kind of support or guidance can AIP members expect if they want to try? Yeah.
Well, as much as we can give. I mean, it's worth framing this because Axate operates on a revenue share model. Each implementation is an investment by us because it does incur cost for us, but we only get to make money if the publishers really lean into it and try very hard to make money for themselves. So that means everything we can do to help that is something we do because otherwise we don't get paid. So we do lean into it. And the types of support we will give typically are two things, and I think the larger scale we do this on in South Africa, the more we'll be able to invest in this. First one is obviously implementation, helping get things up and running. That's kind of, that kind of goes with the territory. But the second one is some of the stuff we've been talking about, helping publishers understand what's going to work, helping them work through how their product might change and evolve. Helping them understand the data that we can see that is telling them what's working and what isn't working so well, helping them with pricing and all of that. Now, the more of you do this together, and this is really what I'm very keen to do. I think standalone small implementations on their own don't generate huge amounts of money. It really is the network that works. So what I'm looking for and hoping is that we can encourage you guys and your other members, and also some of the bigger media players in South Africa, to lean into this idea that now's the time to really make a decisive change and do it together, because that's how it's going to be powerful. And that means Axate will be able to invest more in helping make that happen. And it also means that we can start to create sort of self-support amongst that community of publishers, because you've also all got the same interest, right? More users, spending more money more often. That's the goal of everybody in the whole network. And you can't make them, you can only make them choose to do it because they like what you've got. All of which is a pretty positive and weirdly unusual set of incentives for the internet, where strangely enough, making people like your product more doesn't necessarily deliver more revenue in the current models.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, colleagues, any final questions before we wrap up? Yeah, because Dominic, so my sense is, we need to think about this as AIP. I mean, it's great to have had you here to kind of discuss this and kind of look at how many people would need to kind of buy in order to make it viable for the project to go ahead. So yeah, I want to leave that with you, but also Austin, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Kate. Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to say. I think number of publishers to have a buy-in. And then I was just also thinking, because they will set up a platform for South African publishers, and then maybe someone, I don't know how the stories are distributed, someone maybe out of the blue kicks in maybe in Zambia or Botswana or somewhere, or in America. Are they still able to, number one, subscribe? And number two, is there currency conversion? Like if I say I'm charging 6 Rand per day per user, is there currency conversion? Because I know the pound is quite big. When you talk 25 pence, that's actually 6 Rand.
Right.
So, yeah, those are the two questions. If somebody kicks out of the blue from a country that where you are not existing, what happens then? And they want to subscribe, and then is there currency conversion for members that are existing, maybe if they're in the UK or so?
The goal is that every Axate user everywhere has access to all Axate publications everywhere. The way it currently works is that as a publisher, we will periodically update you on the currencies we're supporting and ask you to set a price for your product in that currency. So we won't do an automatic currency conversion that results in them seeing some weird number with lots of decimal places. And as I said before, you need to set a market appropriate price for the market setting price for. So the price you would set in US dollars might be quite different. It wouldn't be a straight translation of your price in Rand. So we would ask you to set a price for the currencies we support, and we'll update that as we introduce more currencies. At present, if you don't set a currency that we support, you won't be available in that country. They won't be able to buy your product. Some publishers might choose to do that because media regulation in some countries makes them not want to be active there. So, for instance, some of the Gulf states, some publishers perceive to be risky because they have content standards that don't apply in their home market. So they might choose not to be in certain markets, and they would do that by simply not setting a price for that market. So I think that's quite simple, but I think it's also quite elegant. I think it kind of works and it doesn't massively overcomplicate things.
Great. Yeah, any final comments? Yeah, and sorry, Dominic, just the question about, and maybe it's a difficult one, off the bat, but do you have a sense of like, if, for instance, 10 publishers sort of said we're prepared to kind of opt in. Would that kind of make sense? Or literally you can start with a small amount because, let's start experimenting. I mean, just your thoughts on kind of numbers of publishers that would need to commit in order to make it kind of worth further exploring.
Well, I mean, it is a difficult question
Yeah.
because there's a bunch of factors in here, and I suppose what I would say is if the feeling among the group was sort of ambivalent, then that would be a bit worrying, because I think when you think it through, it really does work much, much better when it's a network. So if the feeling was, let's stand back, see if it works before we decide if we're going to join, then I'd be nervous about that, because it's a bit like you're saying, I'm not going to send my football players on the pitch until after they score their first goal. I want people to understand that they need to get proactively involved in making this happen, and that if they want it to happen organically, or for everyone else to sort of make it work and then come on board later, it just won't. And so I think, there's a difference between 10 publishers wanting to do it because all the others don't, or everybody wanting to do it and just working out what's the best place to start and who's in the best position to start. So I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that. But I do think it needs some ambition. And what I hope you got from the slides at the start was that really doing nothing isn't an option. I don't think anyone thinks that in the news industry, right? Just doing nothing it's not been working. So we can't carry on like that. So I'd be really looking for strong and enthusiastic endorsement. I think there's another factor which Kate, you know better than I, but I am aware that there's this Google funded
exactly. I'll Google
and that maybe, I mean, bluntly, for Axate, small company investing a lot of resource in entering a market with no guarantee of return, obviously the less risky that is, the easier it is to do it. I'm really, really keen to do it. I think South Africa is one of the best markets to show this can work on a wide scale, and it would be such a great story to be able to tell the world, as well as just the obvious benefit of increasing the health and prosperity of the South African publishing industry. But there's quite a few factors in play, and I guess I rely on you to give me the feedback about the level of excitement and enthusiasm and how we can build that. And that's where we need to start.
Juan, I saw your hand up. Please go ahead.
No, I think I'm fine. I'm sorted. You just answered me.
Okay.
Already got a response. But my worry was, if you try it out and you sort of like reluctant that, hey, this thing is not gonna work, how are you going to make it work? But with the other stuff that we've tried out, there's people who've like paid subscriptions and whatnot, but the model is not so stable. So I'm optimistic that maybe if I can try something like this with more hands-on help on the back end, maybe we might be able to focus on the content side of things when there's someone who can help with this stuff. Because it tends to be more complicated to ask people to come and pay, and they want to pay, yet the system that you have on your back end, and your front end is not so well structured, or it keeps on breaking. I'm on board. I just wanted to share that I'm in. I want to try it out. I'd love to try it out.
Great, that's good to hear.
And really to make it work.
Brilliant.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I mean, thank you. I mean, because I mean, Juan is one of our publishers that has definitely been experimenting with all of these different things, payment models, apps, etc., etc. So I think that there is something exciting about them saying, okay, so this is something that as a network we can do, which I think also is, I mean, we do have some network projects. Chris has done the SANEF digitization drive, where he's got a WordPress multi-site, and he's pulled a number of publishers, I think it's about 10, including radio stations as well, together. So again, I think it might also be interesting. I think Chris was on at another workshop or something, because it would also have been good to get a sense from Chris, like what his view was in terms of, he's got a network and kind of bringing a network on on side as well, which I think is an interesting one. I mean, like what you're saying about your cyclists, for instance, a group of cyclist publications coming together, also kind of makes it exciting, because then you're bringing a group, which that just gives that extra power.
I mean, I think thinking outside news,
yeah,
is important, right? That people's interests don't start and stop with news. But I think we're talking about media generally, and broadly speaking, most people are facing similar challenges. So the network, the more it grows, the better it works. So let's think about the relationships. I mean, with national media, magazines, maybe even TV. I think subscription streaming is only reaching a small part of, or a minority of most markets. And so there's lots and lots of ways, when we have established critical mass, that we can all think of to kind of make the market more active and more valuable.
Yeah, great. Okay, colleagues, thanks so much. We've got to 11 o'clock, and yeah, a big thank you to Dominic for putting together the presentation. Please send it to us, because I'll then send it out to the members on this call and to others as well. Any further information on how your network is working in the UK and how long it's been going and the kind of benefits, also super helpful. So any extra information is definitely needed and wanted. And thanks colleagues for joining. Really appreciate your time. So super. We will be in touch with each other.
Thank you all. Great to see you. Happy to do this again anytime.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah, follow-up discussions. Great. Bye. Bye, everybody.